Hey guys, it's Jason here, and today I'm going to give you a controversial take on a topic you've probably heard a lot about: China and human rights, or China and its, let's say, problems with human rights. For years, China has hounded human rights activists in China and around the world. It's even gone so far as to declare the concept of modern human rights just yet another part of America's giant global imperialist scheme to keep countries like China down. While this sounds like another angry, oppressive, authoritarian state spewing vitriol at anyone who challenges it, there is also something deeper here. Much, much deeper. So today I'm going to talk about how China can't accept modern notions about human rights if it also wants to stay a functioning country at the same time. And if that sounds backwards, well, this is China we're talking about, so strap in. This is about more than China being an authoritarian state that just doesn't respect the individual. On a deeper level, China simply lacks what it takes to have a modern, rights-based society built around individuals. The second any Chinese state tries something like this, it would blow up in its face. And the government knows that, and so anyone who's ever really looked, and so has anyone who's ever really looked at China or been there or studied its history. And we're seeing that proven right now. Remember when everyone just a few years ago was imagining that China would somehow become a liberal democracy? How'd that go? How did the advance of economic growth and technological progress in China go to creating the political system people imagined it could have that could emulate the West and bring China truly and fully into the modern world and into the community of nations? Well, the same reason this failed is the same reason China cannot have or abide or even really acknowledge human rights. China, in essence, China developed because it didn't acknowledge human rights. China's breakneck development required little thought for individuals. It actually required that they purposely weren't given thought. That means no labor protections, no healthcare, no real insurance systems, no real property rights, none of that stuff. China got where it is today not by considering the individual, but by considering the whole, the state or the community or the society as a whole. It built its roads and cities and factories by kicking people out of their old lives and off their land and forcing them to work. And this really did work up to a point. It built great systems and a remarkable modern industrial society, but it did this always from the perspective of the whole. And if you take that perspective, it is always the group first, and you just can't consider the individual. Just think about this. China reasonably asked, how is any country with over 1 billion people supposed to care about the claims and feelings or rights of every single person or every single peasant? How was that supposed to work or supposed to produce a better nation? How is China supposed to get anywhere if every little person or little claim could stop or veto the process? That's what China thought, and truly, there is something to that. China would not have developed the way it had it from the beginning in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s really been acknowledging or dealing with human rights in the way the West likes to think of it. That is not palatable to people in the West, but that is also the truth. But this goes way, way, way deeper than China's modern recent development. China has been like this quite literally forever, and it has nothing to do with ethnicity or race. Chinese people around the world live prosperous and free at the same time, whether in Hong Kong, till recently, or Taiwan, or Orange County, or British Columbia, or London, or San Francisco, or anywhere else in the world where the Chinese diaspora has moved. The problem has always been that this cannot be done in mainland China. It is not about race or ethnicity, and I can't really emphasize that enough. It is fundamentally about geography. China has, well, it has always had too many people and far too little capital in comparison. And there are many reasons for this, which I'll get into in another video. But in general, this is the way it looks. Northern China lacks capital producing regions, but it has a lot of people. The west and northeast of China are big big, expansive security perimeters that have to be patrolled, they don't really make money, they cost money. Southern regions like Hong Kong and Taiwan are often rich, but they're also usually linked in with foreign trade systems and don't really send enough capital back to the mainland, except for in very unique circumstances like the 70s and 80s. But most of the time, they're not part of the same game. And there are multiple issues like this on and on throughout China. The only one really super wealthy region in China is the Yangtze River region, the lower, middle, and upper courses of the Yangtze in various ways, but primarily the lower courses, the Yangtze River Delta around Shanghai. But even this region is not nearly wealthy enough to pay for everything. This is basically something like asking America's industrial urban Northeast, that sort of megalopolis from New York down to Washington, to support 30 West Virginias or something like that. That is what we're talking about. It is very rough going. This problem of too little capital is essential to understanding all of Chinese history. And unfortunately, the last 50 years have really made it tough for people to remember what China is like and what China still is under the surface. So in general, there's not enough money to go around, and that's just the start. The real problem is when you add in the people, lots and lots of people. China may not produce crazy wealth, but it does support a lot of people, as should be obvious. Hence its enormous population today, which is over 1 billion people, but which it has had relatively compared to every other region on Earth, really throughout its history, at least since the first millennium BC. Now, wealth and agriculture are actually very closely connected, but the relationship is pretty intricate and nuanced, so it's something I'll get into in another video. But for now, what China's large population combined with its very little wealth means is a large, poor population. And this isn't rocket science, it shouldn't sound like it, and it should really accord with what people remember of China in the 70s, 80s, and really through the 90s, and even really today in many respects. But we look now at many of the wealthy coastal regions in China. We don't look at everything else. And again, the scale of this country, the large population, and the many diverse regions. And all of this is really in a country, not just with diverse regions, but filled with divisions. And this altogether is not a stable situation. These many regions and perimeter regions and kind of wealthy regions and historically minority-filled regions and poor regions and all of this is all extremely volatile and combustible. Hence the many, many brutal, violent periods in Chinese history. The only thing that can hold all this together, the only thing that has ever held it all together, even for a little bit of time, is a strong central state. That is why China has had a strong central state throughout its history, or at least whenever you'd call it, a powerful China. It's this dynasty, it's that dynasty, it's the next dynasty. That's the way it works. And ironically, a strong Chinese central state is strong compared to almost every other country around the world, but it is also, it's just again ironically weak for China's own needs. These internal problems within China are so bad that even China's classic authoritarian megastates are still not enough. That's why the Chinese state breaks down again and again. So what you also see is that whenever things are going bad, all of these Chinese states start to clench their fists even tighter just when things are starting to unravel, which is what the People's Republic is doing right now. And in general, like I said, these Chinese central states, when they form, they don't have much money available to them. They spend the vast majority of their money just trying to stitch the place together. So they don't throw money at their problems. That is not how China works. What China does and what the Chinese central state does is throw people at its problems. That is what they do. From the Great Wall to the Grand Canal, to fighting Mongol hordes, to picking rice, to repairing dikes and dams, to building high-speed rail systems, to staffing thousands of factories to produce cheap goods, what China does is fundamentally to throw people at its problems. This has been the basic style of the Chinese state since it came together in the first millennium BC. China has always developed by not respecting what we now call human rights. and by instead focusing on how the state can use people and labor to empower itself. Very little has changed. Today, it may seem like China has endless money to throw at its problems, but that is really just an artifact of the world we live in, and it was for a brief period, and it didn't have all that much to do with China in a lot of ways, but the global system, and that's something I'll talk about in another video. But in general, this is a people-driven place. And here's the key to all this. A country that throws people at its problems cannot have any deep respect for the individual. It is as simple as that. Forget culture and ethnicity and race and language and all of that other stuff, at least for the moment. Like I said, we can point to Chinese people all over the world who don't think this way and are successful and value human rights and dignity and all of that. What we are talking about is mainland China and what needs to happen for mainland China, for the political state in East Asia, to actually believe or respect or enshrine human rights in any way that the rest of the world or the rest of the developed Western world thinks appropriate. And unfortunately, in China, all the weight of history, and I really do mean all the weight of Chinese history, pushes against individual human rights and towards making sure the state can continue to use people to solve its problems, whether the people particularly want to solve those problems or not. Put simply, human rights, as the West considers them, deprive the Chinese state of the means to fortify and defend itself, particularly in times when things are bad. When times are tough, that is when the Chinese state most needs this power. That is what the Chinese state needed when COVID hit in January and February of 2020. It needed to lock down the people. It needed to use massive state population control infrastructures run by people, and it needed people manning all of the different elements of everything, of the public health thing, of security measures, of digital controls, everything. It all requires a lot of people. China is now trying to lower the cost, lower the amount of people and everything that's needed through various new technologies, but don't buy the fact that this is a super high-tech state yet that doesn't need people to solve its problems. It uses people for every single little thing, and anyone who's gone to China can see that right everywhere you look. Now, this is obviously not ideal for China in a lot of ways, and the truth is China knows this, but think about it. Spurning individual liberties obviously means cutting a country off from many things, like trade, like science, like free thought, like innovation, like art. All of these things are inevitably crushed by a collectivist impulse that is this strong and that particularly wants to use people, which means their labor, their skills, their everything. Not back in the day, it was like their physical labor. Now it's quite literally their mental labor, emotional, everything. When everything is directed towards keeping the state together, keeping it alive, keeping it powerful, keeping it in one piece, you lose a lot of things. But the truth is, in China, there is a clear hierarchy of priorities, and political integrity is at the top, bar none, full stop, period. Preserving the state, the central state that holds everything together in China, is paramount. Everything else is secondary. And this often means that the Chinese state does shoot itself in the foot repeatedly, again and again. That is basically inevitable when many of the things it needs, particularly today, like innovation and new ideas and new technologies, they would come much easier if it would relax its grip. But it doesn't really matter to the state. The Chinese state cannot ever fully relax its grip. And every single time when it has partially released its grip, such as during parts of the Han Dynasty, the early Tang, some of the late Qing, and of course in modern China since 1978, every single time it inevitably ends up freaking out and clenching things even tighter again afterwards, for interesting reasons that I'll probably talk about in another video. But the authority, power, and control of the Chinese state always comes out on top, and it must come out on top, even if it means the Chinese state destroys itself in the process of maintaining this hold on people and on the population and on the way the state and the people relate going forward. China sees the idea of a weak state or a limited state or expanded individual liberties or universal human rights or whatever you want to call it as a clear call for China to willingly march to its own destruction, and that it is not going to do ever. There is not going to be a unified China in this century that adopts the political principles prevalent in the West. It is just not going to happen. It's not at least going to happen, again, not with a unified China. If you want China broken into many different pieces, a very different thing would also happen, but maybe some of the little pieces could have political rights, kind of like what you see in Hong Kong and Taiwan. But for all of China, it is not going to happen. China will likely march to its own destruction on its own and by following its own tried and true style, which does ironically involve clamping down on human rights, but that is in many ways part of its DNA, which human rights are not and will never be. So, human rights are a beautiful ideal, but they are not going to suddenly appear in China. It doesn't matter what activists do. It doesn't matter what other countries do. It doesn't even matter what the Chinese people do. This is simply the lay of the land. And that doesn't mean human rights are wrong or that the Chinese government is right for rejecting them. It means that our world is often more nuanced and complex than we care to realize. Something everyone watching this channel is hopefully starting to see. So thanks for watching this video. If you want to hear more about the US, China, and the world, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you really enjoyed the video, hit the button so more people can see it. And as always, comment or message me with thoughts or questions. This is Jason Scheftel, and I'm signing off until